Have you had lower back pain from lifting, and would you like a method to be able to overcome it? Well, that's going to be the topic of this tutorial. I'm going to use that as an example, but I'm going to be talking you through the method I would use if you were to come and see me, or if you were to work with me online to overcome your lower back pain whilst, or the initial cause was lifting. We're going to focus on 3 sort of fundamental stages of that. We're going to look at understanding your lower back pain. So that's the first step. We need to understand it a little bit better to be able to gauge what type of things we need to do in the next 2, which is then reducing the lower back pain and then building the spine health afterwards and in its place, if you will. So why do we need to understand your lower back pain? Well, it dictates the other 2. It dictates what we do in the reducing of lower back pain stage and the rebuilding of spine health. So it's not just as simple as saying, right, here's a couple of exercises, go away and do them. What we need to be able to do is investigate a little bit deeper than that, because your low back pain is specific to you. So we are talking about the initial cause being the lifting movement, let's say. And what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about when we've got that initial cause? Well, we need to be thinking about pain intensity, pain duration, pain frequency. It could be as simple as the type of pain it is. Is it like a spasm type of pain? Is it a radiating type of pain? So we need to understand that, because again, that's going to help us build what we need to do in its place. Some other things are, what are the painful patterns you're going into and what are the pain-free patterns that you're going into. All of that information is going to start building a picture of some of the things that we need to do to reduce your lower back pain and some of the things that we need to start doing more of to, in a sense, overcome your lower back pain. Once we've completed the consultation phase, where we're gathering information verbally, if you were, say, working with me on a one-to-one basis, what we would then look at is a self-assessment. So we would go through like a movement and a physical assessment to start understanding the movements and postures that your spine likes and doesn't like. And what that basically means is, does, for example, a rounded posture make your pain worse, or does it feel a little bit better? We would look at that for an extended spine. As I've mentioned, a rounded spine. We would look at things like, is it sort of like a nerve pain that starts to go down into the buttocks or down the legs, and different things like that. So we would then investigate that, because again, that's going to start helping me as the coach, or you as the individual, to be able to understand your lower back pain that much better. So when we start using movements, postures, positions later on, we know which ones are going to help you become pain-free and ones to avoid that might trigger any initial pain. We would also start looking at core endurance and core stability. So just a couple of simple self-assessments that you can do to start understanding where your core endurance or your core stability is at. And then again, we can start to think about, do we need to improve core endurance and stability, or is it just one of the 2? So it will point us in that direction. And once we've collected all this information, this is going to help us do, in some respects, kind of what I've been describing already. It's going to help us start to learn the postures, positions, movements and loads that we need to start reducing so we don't trigger the pain. And it's also going to give us movements, postures, positions and loads that we can start to do more of, so we can start to increase the pain-free experience that you have in your lower back. This is where I use 4 components. Now, it doesn't mean using all of these components. We might just use one of them or 2 of them. We might use all of them or 3 of them. It doesn't really matter. That will be dictated by the previous step in understanding your lower back pain. We might start with one, and then as the treatment or the therapy evolves, we might then bring in a second and a third and then finally a 4th one. So again, it all depends on what happened in understanding the lower back pain. So those 4 things are movements, exercising, stretching and massage. As I mentioned, we're using the initial cause of your lower back pain was lifting a heavy object from the floor. So we're going to use that at the outset. So this is now what's going to start to become a little bit more specific. I was talking a little bit more general before, but now we're talking sort of specific things. So let's just say you've bent over, you've tried to lift a heavy object and your back has now gone into spasm. So what would happen if it was necessary? I would use like a massage techniques to start with, to just relax that area. Spasms are generally protecting the area. So they might stay there for a few days, possibly a week, or maybe even 2 weeks, depending on the perceived damage or the actual damage to the lower back. Now, we might find that massage helps, it loosens off and allows you to move a little bit more freely. What that then sets us up to be able to do is then start to improve that movement, because if it was that movement that initially caused the problem, we then need to go about improving the movement so it doesn't do that in the future. So we could use massage. Now that could be a self-massage or from another person. So if you're with me one-to-one, I could get my hands on you and massage through the lower back and the hips. If it was an online therapy or an online consultation, then what would happen is we could use foam rollers, we could use orb balls, we could use lacrosse balls or hockey balls or whatever it might be, or some sort of massaging implement to be able to massage the lower back and the hips. What that will allow us to do, as I've mentioned, is it will just free that area up, so it just eases the movement, so you're then able to go into what would be the next part, which is then refining that movement. And the 3 movements we would focus on would come from my sort of fundamental movements. I say there are 8 fundamental movements. Now the 3 that we would focus on would be lifting, carrying and walking, because those 3 movements they're very sort of tied together and they go together hand in hand. So if we can improve all 3 of those, and then obviously returning the weight to the floor would be a part of that as well. If we can improve all of those, we're going to go a long way to improving the movement and reducing your risk of lower back pain in the future. The second thing to be looking at are what I call core skills. Now there are 5 of them, but we want to be focusing on sort of 3 out of the 5. The first one is joint awareness. So your ability for you to understand what position your body's in. Also, we would then be looking at the hip hinge, which is very tied, very closely knit with joint awareness. And then finally, the abdominal brace. So all of these 3 together, the abdominal brace is there to stiffen the torso, to hold the spine in position, so it reduces the load on the spine and spreads that load around the torso. The joint awareness and the hip hinge is there to get you not only moving from the hips, but knowing that you're moving from the hips. So whenever you go into that position, you know you're moving from the hips, you're maintaining the proper posture of the spine, and then you're wrapping that with the abdominal brace, which is then able to take the load away from the spine, and we can lift from the hips. And all that I've talked about so far with the lifting, carrying, walking, and the 3 core skills, that could be enough initially to reduce your lower back pain. So what it will do is it will get you out of that initial sort of spasming muscle. It will get you back into moving, let's just say, correctly or better, and then that will keep the load low on the spine. Then what we've then got is then part number 3, where we start building some blocks around your core to be able to protect it even further, and we would also then go about refining that movement and sort of building good quality movement with more resilience of the core. So we're now into the 3rd stage, which is building spine health. So what we're going to start focusing on here is this is when we might then bring in exercise and stretching. So we've already used the massage and the movement to reduce the initial pain. What we're now doing is adding to that the exercising and the stretching to be able to build the core up so it's more resilient, so it's able to cope with, let's just say, greater loads or greater stresses, so we then don't get it in the future. Now, it's not about preventing lower back pain in the future, it's about minimizing risk. If anyone comes along to say that you'll never have low back pain in the future, it's going to be 100% eliminated because we're going to do these preventative things, then that's not necessarily the wisest sort of way of describing it first, but it's not the wisest way to go about thinking about your lower back pain, because so many different things can cause lower back pain. If we can get this one, if we can minimize risk with this one, we can then, in a sense, minimize risk of it happening in the future, but that doesn't mean something else will come along at a later date that could trigger your lower back pain. So what are we going to be doing in this stage? Well, as I've mentioned, we're going to be using core exercises and we're going to be using hip stretches. So with regards to core exercises, we'd be talking about isometric training. Now, this is what we would do to start with, and again, I've got to kind of limit what I'm talking about here because there is no real end to this therapy. It will just kind of then mould, as long as we take it and do it properly, it will then mould into what we would call fitness training. Because not only can we overcome the injury over here, but we can build then a bridge into fitness training if that's where we needed to get back to. If we aren't going back into fitness training, we don't need to build that bridge. We can just get you out of pain, we can build that resilience, and then that's as far as we need to go, which is just maintaining essentially just an exercise therapy. So exercises that we would be using would be things like planks, side planks, bridges, and bird dogs. Now, what these exercises are doing is we aren't necessarily just saying just do the exercises. What we want to be able to do is not only do them correctly, but we want an emphasis on the core skills that we've talked about. So when we go into the plank and the side plank, are we bracing the abdominals appropriately? Are we then, once we are braced, are we then breathing appropriately? Because if we can breathe, which is another one of the core skills, we can help relax the muscles or relax the response of the muscles, so they then won't spasm or they won't be as frightened and then go into spasm as badly. So we've got the bracing that we're still practicing, we've got the breathing that we're still practicing, we've also got with the bird dog the joint awareness, because with the bird dog we move the opposite arm and leg, so we are straightening the let's just say, or we're extending and flexing the shoulder and the hip joints, but we're trying to maintain proper posture of the spine. So we're not only just doing those exercises, we're training the core skills, which is why I called them that. Because they, in some respects, they're universal to your body no matter what you're doing. You want to be able to brace your abdominals appropriately. You want to be able to breathe appropriately. You want to be able to understand the position that your body's in. You want to be able to hip hinge and move from the hip. Those things are fundamental even before we start exercising, hence why we practice them before. But we're just going to ingrain and enhance that as we go forward using these exercises. We also then want to train in short bouts, because what we're then sort of doing is we're not fatiguing the core muscles to within an inch of them spasming again. That, in a sense, is for later on. So that's where normal fitness training would resume, is where we try and fatigue a little bit more, to try and build back that much stronger, that little bit faster. But we've got such a strong resilience or strong cushion that we can afford to put lots of fatigue in. If we're just coming back from a lower back injury or a lower back spasm, for example, then we don't necessarily have that cushion and that resilience to be able to put all that high intense fatigue on top of it, because the back will just crumble. We need to build that up in small stages, and then once we're at a more advanced level, then we can start thinking about fatiguing it a lot more. When it comes to the next part, including the stretches, what we would then focus on are the hips. So we would focus on the hip flexors, so psoas, iliacus, rectus femoris. We would also look at glute medius, glute minimus, and finally the adductor group down the inside of the leg. So those would be the three areas that we would focus on. We would focus on that not only to increase range of movement of the hip, but also that will help relax and relieve tension on the lower back. I've described many times before that I call the hips the pressure cooker, and then the pain comes out of the lower back. So if you can imagine one of those kettles where you put it on the stove, and then when it gets hot enough it starts to whistle. Well, as the pressure builds up in the hip, it starts to whistle out of the lower back. If we can stretch the hips, that's like flicking that little lid, and then the whistling disappears. So we need to, in a sense, stretch those different muscles, get those different muscles not only looser, but with a little bit of greater range of movement, but we also just need to relax them. So it might not be that we need to increase the range of movement, we just need to relax them. And stretching is a way of doing that. Also, massage can be a way of doing that, hence why I talked about that early on, about stretching the lower back, but also stretching the hips to try and relax those muscles. That can then help us again sort of put another layer on top, improving the movement, improving the range of movement, so we can then go and lift off the floor. And then finally, we would then go back to focusing or continue focusing on those fundamental movements. So 3 of them, which is lifting, carrying, and walking. So it would be as simple as lifting a weight from the floor. Now, along with that, not only the physical or biomechanical benefits will we get from it, you'll also get sort of mental benefits from it. Because I know from working with people that have had their back pain triggered when it comes to lifting, they have sort of not necessarily an unconscious block, but they're just a little bit anxious about going into that position and lifting a weight. So we would go into that position with a light weight to give them the confidence that not only they can get into the position, but they can lift the weight safely in a good position. It might mean lifting the weight from the floor, and then as we go through the exercises and the stretching and the improving of the range of movement, we can then get them down lower whilst maintaining proper position of the spine and hip hinging, moving from the hip. So that would be kind of the first thing that we would go through. Once we can get the weight up, we would then focus on carrying it. Now that could be carrying it by your side like a suitcase, or carrying it up in a rack position, or on a shoulder, or something like that. But essentially we would then want to carry it. And then whilst we're carrying it, we focus on the walking posture and the walking movement. So it's not just like an ambling walk, it's a walk with purpose. So we are walking slightly faster, we're walking with good posture, so we're bracing the abdominals. We've got the awareness, because we've trained that before, to be able to maintain that posture. So all the way through, with every single stage of this, we're not only focusing on the movements and doing exercises and doing stretches, but we're doing them with a purpose, which is the core skills and the fundamental movements, because they are the ones that are universal, that underlie all this training. If we can improve and get proficient and competent at the core skills and at the fundamental movements, we can start going about improving our lower back pain. Once we've then improved it, we then start layering on top the building of spine health. Once we've got to that point and we can go into these positions confidently and lift a variety of objects in a variety of different lifting techniques, then we know we've got that competency to be able to minimize we know that we've minimized the risk of lower back pain. What we can then start to do is then start layering on greater strength, greater endurance, and greater movement competency. And then that's only going to take us further away from lower back pain. Again, I can't say that we're going to eliminate it and never have it again, because there are different ways and different injuries or different ways that the lower back can become injured. So we have to understand it in that way. So that is my sort of whistle-stop tour of overcoming lower back pain if you've had it whilst lifting. So it's very much a case of the 3 stages: understanding your lower back pain, reducing it first, which could use movement, exercise, stretching, and or massage. So it could be all of the above, or one of the above, or any of the above. Then once we know we've got past that initial reduction of lower back pain, it's then building the pieces in place with exercises, with stretches, again with massage and with movement. But we're focusing on the core skills all the way through and the fundamental movements. And then if we so choose, we can then go back into sort of traditional fitness training, but we can't lose sight of the core skills and the fundamental movements. So again, that's my whistle stop tour. I hope it's been helpful for you. If you would like to work with me on a one-to-one basis, be it face-to-face or online, you can go to the link in the description. You can find out more about that, and we can start working together to help you overcome your lower back pain. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.